On July 11, 2026, a dark shadow suddenly fell over the football world when news broke that 25-year-old midfielder Jayden Adams had collapsed from a stroke and passed away, leaving his father Juanito Adams completely devastated. The exact chain of events that unfolded in the brief hours leading to his death sent shockwaves through the sporting community as fans were left paralyzed in disbelief. It was supposed to be a standard routine day, yet according to preliminary reports, something felt distinctly off during the warm-ups. Sources close to the team suggest Jayden had mentioned a slight, unusual discomfort earlier in the afternoon, a subtle detail that seemed insignificant at the time, but would soon become the catalyst for an unthinkable tragedy. Witnesses nearby described a moment of sudden silence as Jayden staggered near the midfield circle, his hand clutching his chest before he hit the ground without warning, sparking immediate panic among players and staff alike. Medical teams reportedly rushed onto the field within seconds, their urgent hand gestures signaling to the sidelines that this was far more severe than a standard sports injury. The stadium atmosphere transformed from vibrant excitement to an overwhelming, suffocating dread as rumors spread that Jayden was experiencing a massive cerebral event. In the stands, his father Juanito watched the chaotic commotion unfold, his heart pounding against his ribs as a desperate terror took hold. According to onlookers, Juanito pushed through security barriers in a frantic attempt to reach his son, his voice echoing over the hushed crowd as paramedics worked relentlessly to stabilize the young athlete. Allegedly, Jayden was rushed to a nearby emergency facility with sirens blaring through the city streets, while Juanito followed close behind in a state of sheer agony, unable to process how his vibrant, healthy 25-year-old son could be slipping away so quickly. Inside the hospital, tense chatter filled the hallways as specialists battled against time, but the damage from the severe stroke was said to be irreversibly devastating. When the final announcement came, confirming that Jayden Adams had succumbed to the stroke at just 25 years old, Juanito collapsed into tears, crushed by an unbearable weight of loss and a bitter sense of betrayal by fate itself. The bond they shared was not just between a parent and a child, but a shared dream built over years of grueling training sessions and unyielding dedication, all crushed in a matter of hours. As news outlet feeds began flooding with tributes and speculation regarding the sudden nature of his collapse, media reports suggested that nobody could have foreseen such a dramatic health crisis in an elite athlete at the peak of his physical conditioning. The rapid escalation from a routine afternoon to an absolute nightmare left the entire sports world grappling with deep sorrow and lingering questions. Outside the medical center, quiet whispers replaced the initial chaos, and as night fell, Juanito stood alone in the dimly lit corridor, staring blankly at his son's untouched, folded jersey, sitting quietly on a chair in the corner of the room. And in that frozen corridor, as the dim overhead lights flickered against the cold linoleum, the silence felt heavy enough to suffocate, carrying with it the subtle, haunting scent of Jayden's favorite pine-scented grip spray still lingering on the sleeves of that folded jersey. Juanito's trembling fingers reached out toward the fabric, hesitating for a fraction of a second as if touching it would make the nightmare permanent. Yet when his calloused thumb finally brushed against the embroidered team crest, the contrast between the vibrant thread and his son's cold, lifeless reality pierced him with a visceral shock. Every stitch in that uniform carried a memory of endless dawn workouts where the two of them would race against the rising sun on muddy neighborhood pitches. Jayden's infectious laugh cutting through the crisp morning air, while Juanito paced the sidelines with a worn stopwatch clutched tightly in his palm. Sources close to the family often mentioned how Jayden never went anywhere without a small, battered leather wristband given to him by Juanito before his very first academy trial. A tiny ritual that had persisted even as he stepped onto professional pitches under blinding stadium lights. According to team insiders, just minutes before stepping out for that fateful warm-up on July 11th, Jayden had been seen sitting quietly on his locker room bench, meticulously adjusting that same worn wristband, a subtle gesture that onlookers now recall with a chilling sense of foreboding. The locker room was reportedly filled with its usual pre-match energy. The rhythmic thud of cleats on rubber flooring, the sharp smell of menthol rub, and the upbeat tempo of a shared playlist. Yet several teammates later whispered that Jayden seemed strangely preoccupied, occasionally rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to shake off a persistent dull pressure. One player reportedly remembered Jayden offering a tight, quiet smile, a stark departure from his usual loud, energetic banter, but everyone assumed it was merely the hyper-focus of a dedicated young midfielder preparing for a crucial fixture. Outside, the summer air was thick and humid, clinging to the skin of the thousands of fans streaming through the turnstiles, completely unaware that inside the tunnel, a quiet, invisible disaster was already gathering momentum. When Jayden finally walked down the concrete tunnel, his cleats clicking steadily against the ground, a camera caught him taking a deep, ragged breath and pressing his hand firmly against his temple for a fleeting second. A detail that went unnoticed by the live broadcast, but now haunts every fan who re-watches the footage. As he stepped onto the pitch, the roar of 30,000 voices swelled into a deafening crescendo, a sound wave that usually fueled his explosive energy. But according to spectators in the lower stands, Jayden took 2 uneven steps toward the center circle before his legs suddenly wobbled beneath him like paper. The sheer, terrifying speed at which his body betrayed him left everyone paralyzed. One moment he was an elite athlete at the peak of human performance, and the next he was gasping for air, his eyes wide with an expression of sheer, disorienting panic that signaled something was deeply, terribly wrong. In row 12, Juanito had been holding his breath, his eyes locked onto his son as they always were, and the moment Jayden's shoulder dipped unnaturally, Juanito was already on his feet, his instinct as a father piercing through the crowd noise before anyone else even realized a crisis was occurring. The sickening thud of Jayden hitting the grass seemed to reverberate through the lower bowl of the stadium, followed instantly by the frantic whistling of the referee and the agonizing screams of teammates calling for the medical staff. Juanito's memory of the next 10 minutes became a chaotic blur of neon bibs, flashing stretcher lights, and the desperate rhythmic thumping of chest compressions, each second stretching into an eternity while the stadium fell into an eerie, church-like quietness. Friends close to Juanito recalled how he fought his way down the concrete steps, his voice hoarse from shouting Jayden's name, breaking through the security barrier with a raw, desperate strength born purely out of fatherly terror. The ride in the ambulance was reportedly an agonizing nightmare of blaring sirens and harsh fluorescent lights, with Juanito sitting crammed in the corner, staring at his son's pale face, while the cardiac monitor beeped erratic, agonizing rhythms that seemed to grow fainter with every passing block. Sources at the hospital recounted how Juanito refused to sit down in the waiting room, pacing the narrow hallway outside the intensive care unit, his hands stained with grass and dirt from the pitch where he had knelt beside his boy. The frantic medical chatter behind the double doors, terms like ischemic event, arterial pressure, and severe intracranial pressure, sounded like an alien language, yet the cold, clinical gravity of the situation was terrifyingly clear. When the head doctor finally stepped out, taking off his surgical mask with a heavy, deliberate slowness that spoke volumes before a single word was uttered, Juanito's world collapsed inward, leaving an empty, gaping void where his entire life's purpose had existed just hours prior. The rumors that began circulating online late that night spoke of sudden, unexplainable physiological anomalies, but for Juanito, none of the medical jargon could explain how the boy he had raised, protected, and cheered for could simply vanish in a single afternoon. Sitting alone in the silent room long after the crowds had dispersed and the stadium lights had been extinguished, Juanito gently picked up the folded jersey, holding it close to his chest as if trying to capture the lingering warmth of a dream that had ended far too soon, leaving only the quiet ticking of the wall clock to echo through the empty dark. Yet even as the quiet ticking of the wall clock echoed through the dark, room 408 felt less like a place of mourning and more like the epicenter of a chilling puzzle that was only just beginning to unravel. According to whispers from nursing staff who worked the late shift, the official cause of death listed on Jayden's preliminary intake sheet was marked with a tiny, unusual red asterisk, a detail that was quietly flagged before being locked away in a restricted electronic database. Sources close to the investigation suggest that within 2 hours of Jayden being pronounced dead, 2 unidentified men wearing tailored suits and carrying silver hardshell briefcases arrived at the hospital's basement records department, demanding immediate access to every digital scan and blood panel taken during the resuscitation attempt. A security guard on duty later mentioned that these men didn't present standard law enforcement badges, but rather a specialized clearance card bearing an emblem no one recognized, leaving the attending staff unnerved and deeply suspicious. Meanwhile, back at the empty stadium, long after the groundskeepers had locked the main gates, a lone figure was allegedly spotted near the midfield grass where Jayden had collapsed, searching the pitch with a high-powered UV flashlight under the cover of midnight darkness. What they were looking for remains completely unknown, but grounds crew members reported finding a strange, perfectly circular patch of scorched turf near the center circle the following morning, a bizarre detail that was promptly covered with fresh soil before reporters could arrive. In the days following the incident, local media outlets began raising sharp questions about the sudden disappearance of Jayden's pre-match medical logs from the club's internal network, records that allegedly documented his routine cardiovascular exams from just 48 hours prior. According to an anonymous whistleblower within the team's medical department, Jayden's baseline heart scans had come back flawless. Yet a physical hard copy of a secondary test, conducted in private just hours before kickoff, had inexplicably vanished from the chief physician's locked office. Adding to the growing web of intrigue, Juanito received a cryptic, unsigned text message at precisely 3:33 a.m. 2 nights after the tragedy, containing nothing more than a set of GPS coordinates pointing to an abandoned warehouse along the city docks and a single timestamp from the night before the match. Friends of the family noted that when Juanito attempted to call the number back, the line went straight to an automated recording stating the number had been disconnected for over 6 months, leaving him staring at his phone screen in total bewilderment. As rumors swelled across online football forums, sharp-eyed fans began analyzing high-definition slow-motion footage of the warm-ups, pointing out a brief, perplexing interaction on the sidelines where a stranger in a dark staff jacket handed Jayden a sealed water bottle. A bottle that Jayden drank from, but which was never seen again in any post-match cleanup footage. The individual wearing the staff jacket was reportedly not listed on the official matchday roster, and stadium security cameras located near that section of the tunnel mysteriously suffered a 5-minute power glitch at the exact moment the exchange took place. Inside Jayden's apartment, which had been left untouched since the morning of July 11th, Juanito uncovered a small, leather-bound notebook hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the bedroom closet, its pages filled with frantic, handwritten notes and dates spanning the last 3 weeks. Among the scattered entries were repeated references to a mysterious term, Project Ethel, accompanied by drawn diagrams of human vascular systems and underlined warnings that read, "They are watching the tests. Don't trust the team doctor." Juanito's hands shook as he turned to the final page, dated July 10th, where a single chilling sentence was scribbled in heavy ink. "If anything happens to me on Saturday, look for the second key in the locker." According to close acquaintances, when Juanito privately returned to the stadium locker room under the pretext of retrieving his son's personal belongings, Jayden's assigned locker had already been completely stripped, its metal door hanging slightly off its hinges as if forcibly searched. The team administration claimed it was standard protocol to clear out personal effects for the family, yet none of Jayden's private items, including his personal phone charger and notebook, were ever officially returned to Juanito. Further complicating the mystery, an independent toxicologist who briefly reviewed the initial emergency room blood samples leaked a quiet statement to investigative journalists, claiming that the chemical markers found in Jayden's bloodstream did not align with a standard natural stroke, but rather pointed toward an obscure, fast-acting compound that leaves almost no trace after 24 hours. Before the toxicologist could release a full formal report, their office was reportedly ransacked, and the scientist suddenly went on an unannounced leave of absence, cutting off all communication with the press. As the city prepared for Jayden's public memorial service, the sense of dread surrounding his passing only deepened, with every new lead raising 3 more questions for every answer uncovered. Juanito sat on the edge of Jayden's bed in the quiet house, holding the leather notebook tight against his ribs, realizing that his son's death was not merely a tragic twist of fate, but the opening move in a dangerous game where the real players were still lurking in the shadows, waiting for him to make his next mistake. While somewhere deep within the quiet city, a hidden phone began to vibrate in the dark. The vibrating phone sitting on the far corner of the desk buzzed once, twice, 3 times before cutting out, its screen casting a momentary blue glow across the handwritten pages of the leather notebook. Juanito didn't reach for it right away. His eyes remained fixed on the final entry, where the ink was so heavily pressed into the paper it had nearly torn through to the other side. Project Ethel was a phrase that didn't exist in any official football registry, sports medicine database, or club archive, yet it was written 5 times on a single page, each time encircled by small, frantic question marks. Outside, a light drizzle had begun to fall, slicking the pavement of the quiet residential street and reflecting the distant amber streetlights. According to local residents who lived along the avenue, a dark sedan with tinted windows had been idling at the corner since dusk, its engine running silently, never turning off even as the hours stretched toward midnight. When a neighbor allegedly walked over to ask if the driver needed assistance, the vehicle simply pulled away without a word, circling the block twice before disappearing into the mist. A detail that seemed trivial at the time, but now hung over the neighborhood like a suffocating threat. In the quiet room, Juanito finally stood up, his joints aching from hours of sitting motionless. He walked over to the desk where the vibrating phone had settled into silence. It wasn't Jayden's primary smartphone. That device had been impounded by hospital security under the guise of an ongoing internal inquiry, but rather a small burner-style flip phone tucked deep inside the lining of Jayden's travel duffel bag. A single unread text message sat on the dim screen, sent from an unlisted number. "The second key isn't in the locker room. Check the frame." Juanito's mind raced back to the stadium, recalling the chaotic moments following Jayden's collapse on July 11th. He remembered the heavy wooden doorway leading into the home team's sanctuary, a frame built from dark mahogany that had stood for decades. Was it possible that Jayden had hidden something physical inside the stadium structure itself, far away from digital servers, surveillance cameras, and the reaching hands of team officials? According to an anonymous post on an obscure sports whistleblowing forum uploaded just hours ago, a secondary blood sample taken from Jayden at the stadium's private medical bay had never made it to the central lab. The poster claimed that a senior club director had personally intervened, ordering the sample to be destroyed on-site, citing contamination, a direct violation of standard emergency protocols. When journalists attempted to contact the chief medical officer regarding these claims, the club's media department issued a brief statement declaring that all staff were under strict non-disclosure agreements pending a formal internal review, a review that had no clear deadline or public timeline. Juanito felt a cold, sharp dread settling deep into his chest. Every piece of information he uncovered made the tragic reality of his son's death feel less like an act of nature and more like a carefully executed subtraction. But why Jayden? Why a 25-year-old midfielder at the absolute prime of his career, a player who lived for nothing beyond the game and his family? He grabbed his coat, slipping the leather notebook into an inside pocket, and stepped out onto the damp porch. The night air was freezing, carrying the sharp scent of ozone and wet asphalt. As he reached the bottom of the steps, his shoe struck something small and metallic lying near the edge of the driveway. He knelt down, his hand trembling as he picked it up under the dim glow of the porch light. It was a small brass key, completely unmarked, tied to a thin strip of torn green fabric, the exact shade of the team's training bibs. Juanito stood alone in the dark driveway, holding the cold piece of metal tightly in his palm, while a block away, the silent red taillights of a car flickered once through the fog, then vanished into the quiet night.